Tonight on Greater Boston, our week of ballot question debates continues with question 2, which would limit the amount dental insurers could spend on administrative costs, mandating the rest go to patient care. But will patients actually benefit? Both sides make their case. Plus, the Natick couple harassed, some would say terrorized, by eBay execs, the latest prison sentences that have resulted, and why they say others were involved and should face consequences too. In the debates over the Massachusetts ballot questions, question 2 has been on the quieter side. But here are the basics. According to the Secretary of State's Red Book, that's the information for voters, a yes vote would regulate dental insurance rates, including by requiring companies to spend at least 83% of premiums on member dental expenses and quality improvements instead of administrative expenses, and by making other changes to dental insurance regulations. A no vote, according to the Secretary of State, would make no change in law relative to the regulations that apply to dental insurance companies. And I should add that a lot of this discussion focuses on a term, medical loss ratio, just the technical term for the percent of money an insurer spends on medical expenses, healthcare quality improvements, as opposed to administrative costs. On the S side of the issue, that's the ad regulations limit administrative cost side. I'm joined by orthodontist Mouhab Rizkallah, who's with the Committee on Dental Insurance Quality. On the no side, that's the keep it how it is side, joined by former State Senator James Welch, who served on a special commission in 2014 that rejected a similar proposal, and he's now with the Committee to Protect Public Access to Quality Dental Care. Dr. Jim, good to see you both. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Doctor, I gave a short explanation from the Secretary of State. Anything you want to add? And after you do that, why is the yes vote the right vote?
Well, simply put, at some point you're going to have to trust your doctors. And I would just point out that at this point, this is not just a state matter, it's actually a national matter. The American Dental Association, the American Academy of Pediatric Dentists, the American Association of Oral Surgeons, the American Association of Endodontists, the Academy of General Dentistry on a national level, and on the have endorsed this ballot question. And on the state level, the Massachusetts Dental Society, the Massachusetts Dental Hygienists Association, the Massachusetts Nurses Association, the Massachusetts Association of Orthodontists,
But why on the merits, beyond the endorsers,
surgeons, and
why on the merits should people vote yes?
This is a very good question. Ultimately, what this comes down to is why is medical insurance regulated and dental insurance is not? And the answer is really demonstrated as a case in point. Delta Dental of Massachusetts in 2019 gave away $291 million to their parent company while only spending $177 million on patient care. They are a not-for-profit company, and at some point, someone was sitting around in a boardroom and they realized that they had a surplus of premium revenue. And that surplus of $291 million, they had a choice. It's a choice that we want to give to patients now.
Got it. And you would say that 83% of that money has to go to patient care.
Actually, all of that money should have gone to patient care.
What's wrong with this yes side? Why should people vote no, Jim?
When evaluating any healthcare policy or recommendation, you always want to think of three things, three main pillars. What's the effect it's going to have on costs to consumers? What's the effect it's going to have on access for consumers? And what's going to have on the access or effect on the actual access, quality of care for consumers? And all three of those questions, this ballot question fails.
But isn't it, my understanding is the Affordable Care Act has mandated that in medical insurance, a certain percentage in the 80s has to go to patient care. If it works for medical care, why shouldn't a comparable thing work for patient care?
Well, as much as traditional health care, traditional medical care, and dental insurance or dental care have a lot in common, there are a few things, and a couple things especially, that they don't.
Like what?
One is that it's mandated to have medical insurance here in Massachusetts, and also when you're talking about trying to cut costs, dental insurance is about 5% of the same type of premiums that take into dental insurers rather than medical insurers. Much smaller pool to try and.
By the way, doctor, just to be clear, other than this Delta Dental thing, I understand this is public reporting. You have no idea what the current loss ratio is. It could be 82%. It could be actually 83%. Do you know that it's not?
We definitely.
How do you know that it's not?
We've gotten that directly from journalists who have asked Delta Dental, and I have that in writing.
Well,
I can provide that.
I don't have time to see this.
Well, so John Chesto So I have two
Globe
pieces. I
Business
have
Writer.
two documents in here. When we came out and exposed this problem, Delta Dental tried to send a message to all doctors, all the doctors, all the dentists in the state, saying, we're not at a 60% medical loss ratio, which is what we claim that they are at. They said, and I have this in writing in my binder. They said we're at an 85% loss ratio. And so my group, the Committee on Dental Insurance Quality, which is composed of 5 patients and 5 dentists, which is the balance of the doctor-patient relationship, we put together a retort to their point, and we published it. We gave it to all the doctors, and guess what? Turns out they've changed their minds. They're no longer at 85%. They told John Chesto about a week and a half ago that they think they're now at 74%. That is not true either.
Why don't you disclose? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. Have the insurance companies released what the loss ratio is?
Well, I think the study, the Milliman study, and I'm sure you've read, and Doctor, you've read as well, very conservative study, talks about even if dental insurance companies had to cut costs or were able to cut costs, and their conservative estimate, even if they were able to break even and cut costs by 10%, your average premium for your average person would still probably go up close to 30 to 40%.
That study, from what I understand, from Tufts was paid for by the National Association of Dental Plans. So why should that have credibility with the public when it's paid for by the side that's opposing the question?
Well, the Tufts study, and as it actually says, and to quote their own study, actually says that the ballot question, and forgive me, Doctor, but is built on very thin information.
If I just may for a second, the thing I still don't understand is, wouldn't the public be far better served, whether the no vote or the yes vote is the right vote, to say, here's the current loss ratio in the industry, so people know when they hear you say it's going to cause diminution in patient care or a raising of premiums, they know how much it's got to be adjusted if his proposal were to become law.
Well, if you look at the ballot question, and unfortunately voters aren't tasked with the job of being able to pick out certain parts of the ballot question. They can only vote yes or no on the ballot question. This ballot question is flawed, and when it comes to potential cost for consumers, potential access for consumers is going to go down, and the quality of care, there's absolutely no guarantee.
When you're shaking your head, just to be clear here, this is the first in the nation from what it is. So how can you be so sure that he's wrong and you're right? How do you know that it won't lead to diminution in care or raising of premiums?
There are so many answers I can give you to that
Well, how about
question.
a short one?
The short one is $291 million is just a case example. $291 million would go back to patients. It would go back to them as premium reductions, as premium rebates, or as copay reductions.
Do you quarrel with these numbers? These are public numbers. They were in a 990 or some kind of filing.
Exactly.
Do you disagree with these numbers?
Well, the Boston Globe, I think, wrote a story just last week, and they had more accurate, I would say, maybe different numbers.
These are the exact numbers in the 990.
Please let him finish if I can. Yeah, I'm sorry,
Thank
Jim.
you, I appreciate it. But the reality is, I think the doctor tries to make this the ballot question about one company. The reality is this is going to affect all consumers. This is going to potentially affect all companies that provide dental insurance. You can't make it just about one company.
Last night we had the question 1 people here, and because they want to change a provision in the Constitution around the income tax, they have to amend the Constitution. Yours is a law change. You could have gone to the legislature and said, this is what I think is best for the people of Massachusetts. Did you do that?
We did.
And what happened?
But I really need to respond.
Well, you can in a second. Can you answer my question?
Yes, I have in my binder here.
You don't need to show me your binder.
In 2015 and 2019, we attempted to go to the Massachusetts Dental Society, tried to get this passed in 2015 and 2019.
With a cap on administrative costs?
Yes. We did it in 2015 and 2019. It never even made it out of committee because of the power of the dental insurance lobby. They are using member funds, the patient funds, to stop the thing from even being voted on.
What should they do if they think it's a bad idea? What should
who do?
What should the dental insurers, if they believe, as Jim would suggest, that it's a bad idea?
There's a great answer to that.
What is it?
What they should do is create controversy and smoke and mirrors and confuse everybody, which is what they're doing. And what Jim just described was a Milliman study, which you pointed out was actually produced by the NADP, and they literally called it in the voter information guide, which in this case is a disinformation guide. They called it specifically, if you're to open it, and I hope every voter opens it, it says on its first line that that premiums will increase according to a recent independent study. But this study was not independent.
Okay, we got that point. Jim, if if I can go back to you for a second, I understand ballot questions can't be separated, but just so that people understand where you're coming from, and I know you're urging a no, there's a portion of this that doesn't mandate the 83% go to patient care. It's a transparency thing. This is in a state which has the worst transparency when it comes to government. As you know, you served in that government. It's not your doing, but in terms of the judiciary, the executive branch, the legislature, would you oppose the transparency provision if that were a standalone by the doctor?
Well, it's not a standalone.
But what if it were? Just so I understand where you guys are coming from. Would you oppose transparency where these loss ratios were reported to the public?
Transparency is never a bad thing, obviously, but the reality is this question doesn't afford the opportunity for the voter to decide. Does not afford the opportunity to decide, or a cafeteria style plan when they go into the voting booth. This is either a question for yes or a question for no.
You know, as Jim has said, this is not just about Delta Dental. I know you have an issue with Delta Dental.
Delta Dental is the largest company.
I understand that, but there are other insurers as well. Getting back to the question I asked you before, how do you know that there won't be, I mean, I assume when people vote, the single most important question to them is going to be, as a patient, which is what virtually every voter is this going to be good for my care? Is this going to be good for my premium? You really don't know.
We do, actually,
How is that?
Jim. So I've been involved in multiple litigations against that expose the numbers from Delta Dental. Delta Dental, specifically, we had a Supreme Judicial Court litigation twice with Delta Dental in the last year regarding this ballot question.
If you could just answer my question.
And they provided data showing that their actual cost as a not-for-profit company is 5.15%, which basically means they're at a 94-ish%. They could spend 94% on patient care. We're giving them 83%.
I mean, they according to you, 5% is administrative and related
Exactly.
costs. Do you disagree with that?
Well, I would add, and just to the point about transparency
Sure.
in the last question, of course, actually in 2011, there were policies that were added in the Division of Insurance, and they were actually repealed within 1 year.
No.
As you know, covering Massachusetts politics for many years, you know that things don't get repealed that quickly unless they were completely to the point where they were no benefit at all.
Well, can you respond to the numbers the doctor is throwing out, this 5% number, and suggesting that 95% would be available in Delta Dental for patient care? Yes, is that accurate as far as you're concerned?
I think it actually highlights the most important point about this is that this question has not been vetted. There's no way to know the numbers that the doctor is talking about. There's no study that shows it.
Those are the numbers provided.
Let him finish.
Piece of paper that you printed out on your own computer, but the reality is this hasn't been vetted out.
This is their complaint. This is Delta Dental's complaint.
Okay, we don't have time to read the complaint here. You have 30 seconds. If you want to give a final shot, literally 30 seconds. Give me your final pitch.
At the end of the day, this comes down to math. You don't have to trust the dental insurance companies. You don't have to trust all of the dental organizations. All you have to trust is the math. The math is simple. When they have a surplus, they have an opportunity to make a decision. Do they make the decision that they are going to give it to patients, or do they make the decision that they are going to give it to themselves? And in this case, they gave it to themselves. Delta Dental took $291 million and gave it away.
Consumers need to ask themselves one question, or three questions, I should say. Is this going to have an impact on me from a cost standpoint? Is it going to have an impact on me from an access standpoint? And is it going to increase the quality of care? On all three of those questions, this fails.
Jim, good to see you. Thanks for your perspective. Doctor, good to see you as well. Thank you very much. 3 years since a group of eBay executives hatched a scheme to terrorize a local couple, 2 more of those involved will soon be heading to prison. But that's nowhere near enough for the couple who were inundated with anonymous packages, including a box of live spiders, a funeral wreath, stalked and threatened on multiple occasions. We'll hear directly from them in a minute, but first, a little backstory on just some of what they endured and what led up to it. Back in 2019, David and Ina Steiner of Natick published some stories in their e-commerce newsletter that were critical of eBay. So in response, a bunch of top eBay types dreamed up a targeted campaign to make their lives miserable. The couple started getting anonymous threatening messages. On top of the items I listed above, they're sent a bloody pig mask, a mask from the movie Saw worn right before a killing, a book on surviving the death of a spouse, and live cockroaches. Their address was posted on Craigslist, inviting strangers to their home for a group sex party. And then 3 people, including the 2 who were just sentenced to prison, flew from California to Natick, at one point driving an unmarked van behind David as he went around town and trying unsuccessfully to install a GPS monitor on the couple's car. The Steiners reported it all to the police, who referred it to the FBI, resulting in the latest prison sentences, almost 5 years for former Senior Director of Safety and Security James Braude, 2 years for former Executive David Harville. Another co-conspirator was sent to prison last year as well, and 4 others who pled guilty are awaiting sentencing. But the Steiners say the plot against them came from the top, and that the company, its former CEO and his deputy, should all be held responsible. To that end, the Steiners did file a lawsuit against all of them, which is ongoing. David and Ina Steiner join me now, along with our lawyer, Rosemary Scapicchio, who I'm sure you remember as the defense attorney for Sean Ellis, as well as other Steiners. It's good to meet you. And Rosemary, thanks for being here. Can we start with you? I have followed the Globe reporting, the other reporting, as closely as one possibly can. And the thing that's not clear to me, what did the Steiners do that would provoke any response, much less a response like I just described? The only thing I ever saw was they said the CEO makes 152 times what the average employee makes, which, by the way, is nowhere near what the average CEO makes in this country. What provoked this?
I don't know. That's why we filed the civil lawsuit. The Steiners want answers. They want to know, why did they get harassed? Why did they choose them? We just don't know the answers to that question. We were hopeful that the criminal trial might bring out some of those answers, but now that everyone has pled, the onus is on us to in the civil suit to try to get those answers.
I know. What's the worst thing you ever said about eBay or anybody in eBay?
Well, first you have to understand that when I write about eBay, I'm writing for sellers on eBay and on Amazon and elsewhere. And so my task, as I see it as a reporter, is not to bring down the company. It's to help sellers succeed on any marketplace they sell. So when I talk about a policy and how it affects sellers, I don't take it the way eBay might spin something. I take it, how does this impact sellers?
But what could they even spin? I mean, again, I've read what's the worst factual criticism you've ever made of the company or any of their leaders?
Well, the context is important too. So the CEO had just been eviscerated by an activist investor who criticized wasteful spending and a lot of other problems at the company. And indeed, eBay was experiencing negative growth under this CEO. And so when I pointed out that he had built a vanity project on campus, and remember, sellers are the ones who pay the fees that go into the coffers, I felt it was important for sellers to know this.
Well, do they contend any of this is factually inaccurate? They don't, do they?
Well, if they had, they could have picked up the phone. In fact, I've spoken to eBay PR people for my entire 20 years covering the company.
What was life like? First of all, when this first started, who did you think was behind this?
We had no idea. Life was a nightmare. It was 3 weeks of hell.
And you're having a hard time even talking about it this far removed from this. What was life like? I mean, what was every day like once this, and it really is terrorism, it's corporate terrorism. What was it like once it started?
It built. It built. Every day was another disturbance, another incident, another police cruiser in front of our house. It was horrific.
Did you worry you were going to be killed?
Yes.
Did you really?
I saw David pull out of the driveway with our 81-year-old friend, and we had just installed a new security camera, and I saw a black van that I had seen earlier in the day follow him, and I was convinced they were going to follow him to our friend's house and attack him physically. I was terrified that they were going to break into our home.
Did you? I read that you slept in separate bedrooms once this started. Is that true?
David slept in the front bedroom to keep an eye on the front door. I slept in the back bedroom, and we thought if somebody did break into our home,
that they'd only get one of you?
Right. That the other would have a chance.
That one would have a chance to
call,
escape.
to run.
You know, David, I'm almost embarrassed to ask this question in light of your response in first. I was going to say, what's the effect of this now, you know, a certain amount of time removed?
It really hasn't subsided. In fact, you know, anytime we go out, I'm aware of people around me. I'm aware if someone is following me, I might take a circuitous route to my destination. And even as early as this morning, I'm a very light sleeper now. I heard a car pull up. We have a very quiet one-way street. A car stopped in front of our house. I heard the door open, and I ran to the window, and saw a man walking up the top to the stairs.
And what did that do to
This
you?
was 4:30 in the morning. It threw me right back into the moment. It was an Amazon delivery.
Oh my God. And Ina, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you told one of our producers when we first invited you on that you were canoeing for relaxation or something, and you had an experience that was troubling. What happened to you?
I'm sorry, kayaking.
Kayaking.
Right,
It's all the same to
right.
me, but I know that. So you're kayaking and what?
So this wasn't during the incident because A, I was too afraid to go kayaking during the incidents, and B, we didn't have time. But afterwards, when law enforcement said, we know who this is, the first time I went kayaking and David was on shore, I saw an elderly woman with a video camera, and once I got into the water, she had binoculars, and I spent about 5 minutes and I came back on shore because I was terrified. And it's also depressed. I mean, we are really depressed because our life is different now, and it's hard to see what's ahead in the future. We just don't know.
I want to talk about the future in a minute. So you filed this civil suit on their behalf. What are you looking for and who's it against?
It is against eBay, Devin Wennick, Steve Weimer. They were the C-suite people. And then all of the 7 defendants who the government charged. We frankly don't think the government went far enough in terms of what
This
they...
is the U.S. Attorney's
US
Office
Attorney's Office.
under Andrew Lelling is when this all started.
This was under
correct?
Andrew Lelling, yes.
Yeah.
It was not under Rachel Rollins.
I don't think there's any dispute, tell me if I'm wrong, that Wennig, who was the CEO, did say to an associate, quote, take her down.
That's correct.
Her being Ina. What do they say? I mean, that's pretty common parlance, a pretty scary thing. What do they suggest take her down means?
I don't know what they think it means, but when you're talking to the director of security, who has the background that Barr has in this case.
The guy who's just sentenced to 57 months.
And you've just told him through your legal department that there's nothing more legally you can do. When you use the words take her down, they have specific meaning. And according to Barr, he understood that directive that came through Weimer to come directly from Wennick and to mean do whatever it takes.
He said that explicitly. It's not your,
No.
he has said but no, Boss said explicitly
Yes.
that he got it from the top boys,
He did.
correct?
He got it from Weimer, who got it from Wennick.
We
Yes.
reached out to Wennig's lawyer on Friday, and let me just tell people what he said. He said, Mr. Wennig, they sent us a statement, had absolutely zero knowledge of the actions of Mr. Baugh and others, as was fully confirmed by an independent investigation by an outside law firm, by eBay itself, and by individuals who were involved. Mr. Wennig never knew, counseled, nor approved any of the conduct that's a subject of the criminal case. Had he known, he would have immediately taken steps to stop it. What's your reaction, and what's this independent investigation?
Well, the independent investigation was paid for by eBay.
Mm-hmm.
So they hired their own company to do their own investigation. And they interviewed a number of witnesses and still didn't turn those interviews over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. We don't have Wennig's interview with his company. They never turned that over. We don't have Jones' interview. They never turned that over. Instead, what the government was satisfied with, which is what our concern is to get an oral report of what these individuals said. So if Wennig had nothing to do with it, give us your statement.
To be clear here, we said before a minute ago, this started under Andrew Lelling, who's the prior U.S. attorney. Obviously, Rachel Rollins is there now. Have you had discussions with her about those who were not prosecuted, who you believe should be?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm in the civil case, not in the criminal case.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I have to keep a very separate stance between what's happening in the criminal case and what's happening in the civil case. I represent the Steiners in the civil case, and they're supposed to be, representing the victims in the criminal case. And if the evidence is there, which we suggest it is, and they know about it, then they should do something about it. But that's not, my role isn't that. When I criticize the criminal investigation, I criticize it because of the way in which corporations are allowed to interact with the U.S. government.
What do you mean by that?
So when eBay found out that they were the target of this investigation, they were allowed to put together a PowerPoint presentation with a bunch of lawyers that all charge $1 million an hour and go into the U.S. Attorney's Office and make a presentation for all the reasons you shouldn't indict us as a company and any of our C-suite people. We'll give you these 7 because we say these are the ones who did it and they're rogue employees. And the U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't allow people that are, the black and brown people that I represent for the most part, to ever go in and
Did you ever have any of those kind of meetings with your clients?
I have never, in the 30 years that I've had, never had a meeting where they've allowed me to say, don't charge my client, charge this one.
I know. Is there any satisfaction for at least some of these characters going to jail, or do you see it as just an incomplete mission?
It would be unthinkable to know that, we didn't know who it was, and if they didn't end up where they are. But it's not closure, and I really want to see people scrutinize other companies and other security divisions within those companies.
It's funny. We're going to get to that in just one
Sorry.
second. No, not sorry at all. I'm glad you brought it up. So do you see a future where you're free of this nightmare, or
Not
do you
yet.
not?
Not yet.
Well, finish. I'm sorry, David.
No, what would be closure is to see real justice done.
What is real justice? What would that mean?
Real justice is to make the company accountable and to make everybody that was involved, either overtly or tacitly involved in this, accountable.
Does this affect the quality of your work? Is there a chilling effect on what you do in terms of how forthright you are? I don't mean you wouldn't be honest, but how forthright, how direct you are in reporting because of this experience?
Think of the position I'm in. I'm suing a company I'm covering. It's untenable. But if it worked, if a company knew that they could attack reporters and shut those reporters down, then where would we be? So, like I said, I write for the sellers. Everything I've ever written about, I look through the lens of the seller. How does it impact them?
Are you more optimistic about the future than your husband is?
Well, I think that tends to be our outlook in general, but I...
You mean as a couple?
As a couple. But on the other hand, he's more of a realist than I am. I have to be able to try to sleep at night.
You're about to say something, Dad?
No, I mean, when you asked about how it affects the reporting, I would say that what it's affected is that this case has taken up so much bandwidth in our lives that it's made the job harder. Because we did this 12 to 15 hours a day in the first place, and now Ina's production has really...
And it's also a matter of trust. I mean, it is impossible for us to have any level of trust in that count. You know, when I call a vendor, and it's always in the back of my mind, you know, they're dependent on eBay.
I understand.
They're dependent on eBay. That's...
Can I follow up? Last question on something Ina said a minute ago. Shirley Young, the business columnist of the Globe, Marjorie Egan and I were discussing this matter on the radio today, and a topic came up sort of like, well, thank goodness it's only this company. But following up on what Ina said, do we have any idea if this kind of corporate terrorism is practiced on other victims and we just don't know about it yet?
Well, we know from some LinkedIn profiles that it appears as if these security officers are in Silicon Valley trading from one company to another. I don't know that definitively, but it certainly appears that from their LinkedIn profiles.
Rosemary Scapicchio, as always, it's
Thank
good
you
to
so
see
much.
you. Ina, good to meet you. I wish you
you,
both
Jim.
luck. David, thank you so much as well.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. Our ballot question debate week continues with question 4, which, if passed, would overturn a recent law that would let undocumented immigrants get driver's licenses starting in July. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you for watching. And please don't forget Ukraine.